The icy water of Lake Morrison hit my lungs like 1,000 knives. I could taste the metallic tang of blood mixing with the murky lake water as I fought desperately to keep my head above the surface. The overturned speedboat bobbed uselessly 20 feet away, its hull gleaming white against the storm-darkened sky. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. "Marcus!" I screamed, my voice barely audible over the howling wind and crashing waves. "Marcus, help me!" But my husband of 7 years wasn't looking in my direction. Through the sheets of rain, I could see him 30 yards away, his powerful swimmer's stroke cutting through the choppy water with purpose. He was heading straight for the blonde woman who was dramatically flailing near the rocky shoreline. Vanessa Chen, his childhood friend, who had conveniently developed a sudden interest in boating the moment she moved back to Millbrook 6 months ago. My waterlogged maternity dress clung to my 6-month pregnant belly like a lead weight, dragging me down with each desperate kick. The baby inside me seemed to sense the danger, moving frantically as if trying to escape the suffocating cold that was seeping into my bones. I could feel my strength ebbing away with each labored breath, my limbs growing heavier as hypothermia began to set in. "Please," I gasped, salt and lake water burning my throat. "The baby—" But Marcus was already pulling Vanessa toward the safety of the shallow water near the dock, his arms wrapped protectively around her trembling form. Even from this distance, I could see the way she clung to him, her manicured fingers gripping his shoulders as if he were her personal savior. The same shoulders I had massaged countless nights when he came home exhausted from his job at the Coast Guard station. The same arms that had held me when I told him about our pregnancy just 4 months ago. The irony wasn't lost on me. My husband, Lieutenant Marcus Donovan of the U.S. Coast Guard, trained to save lives in water emergencies, was choosing to save everyone except his pregnant wife. A massive wave crashed over my head, forcing me under the surface. In that moment of terrifying clarity beneath the dark water, I could see everything that had led to this point. The subtle changes in Marcus over the past months. The way his phone would buzz with messages at all hours. Messages he would quickly delete before I could glimpse the sender. The sudden emergency training exercises that kept him away from home on weekends. The distant look in his eyes when I talked about baby names and nursery colors. And Vanessa, beautiful, helpless Vanessa with her perfectly tousled blonde hair and her convenient habit of needing Marcus's help with everything from flat tires to emotional support after her supposed bad breakup. The woman who had somehow managed to insert herself into every aspect of our lives since returning to town, always with some crisis that required my husband's immediate attention. I fought my way back to the surface, lungs burning as I broke through the water. The dock seemed impossibly far away now, and my movements were becoming sluggish and uncoordinated. Through the rain, I could see Marcus helping Vanessa onto the wooden planks, her arms wrapped around his neck as she sobbed into his shoulder. She was safe. She was fine. And I was still out here, slowly dying in the freezing water with our unborn child. "Marcus!" I tried to scream again, but it came out as barely a whisper. My vocal cords were seizing up from the cold, and my vision was starting to blur around the edges. This was it. This was how it would end. Not in some heroic rescue mission or tragic accident, but because my own husband had made a choice. And I wasn't. The last thing I saw before the water claimed me was Marcus wrapping a rescue blanket around Vanessa's shoulders, his face etched with concern as he checked her for injuries. She looked perfectly unharmed, perfectly dry, perfectly alive. Unlike me. The darkness pulled me under, and I felt my body go limp as the frigid water filled my lungs. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the wail of emergency sirens. Too late. Always too late. As consciousness slipped away, one thought echoed through my dying mind. He chose her. When it mattered most, when our baby's life hung in the balance, Marcus chose to save his lover and let his wife drown. The cold stopped hurting. Everything stopped hurting. And then there was nothing but the endless, crushing weight of betrayal sinking with me to the bottom of Lake Morrison. But death, as it turned out, wasn't quite ready for me yet. I opened my eyes to the sound of my alarm clock buzzing insistently on the nightstand. For a moment I lay perfectly still, my heart hammering against my ribs as I stared at the familiar ceiling of our bedroom. The morning sunlight was streaming through the gauzy curtains Marcus had helped me hang just last weekend. The same curtains that were supposed to be at the bottom of the lake along with my lifeless body. I sat up slowly, my hands immediately going to my belly. Still pregnant. Still 6 months along. Still very much alive. BUS. The digital clock read 7:15 a.m., Saturday, October 14th. I knew this date. This was the morning Marcus had suggested we take Vanessa out on the boat for a fun day trip to help her get over her recent heartbreak. The morning I had foolishly agreed, thinking it would be nice to spend time with his old friend and maybe get to know her better. The morning that was supposed to be my last. I stumbled to the bathroom on shaking legs, gripping the marble countertop as I stared at my reflection in the mirror. Same auburn hair, same green eyes, same face that Marcus used to say reminded him of autumn leaves. But something was different now. There was a hardness in my gaze that hadn't been there before, a cold knowledge that changed everything. I had died. I had drowned in that lake while my husband saved another woman. And somehow, impossibly, I was back. From downstairs I could hear Marcus moving around in the kitchen, probably making his usual Saturday morning coffee and checking the weather for our planned boat trip. The boat trip that was going to kill me and our baby. The boat trip where he was going to make his choice crystal clear. But this time, I knew what was coming. This time, I wouldn't be the helpless victim who trusted her husband to save her. This time, Marcus Donovan was going to learn exactly what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. I placed both hands on my belly, feeling our baby's gentle movements beneath my palms. "Don't worry, little one," I whispered. "Mommy's not going to let anything happen to us. Not again." The sound of Marcus's footsteps on the stairs told me he was coming to wake me up, just like he had before. Soon he would kiss my forehead and tell me he loved me, the same lies that had once made my heart skip a beat. He would suggest we invite Vanessa along for the boat trip, using that casual tone that masked his true intentions. Meet. But I wouldn't be playing that game anymore. This time, Marcus was going to face a choice he never saw coming, and when he inevitably chose wrong, I was going to make sure he understood exactly what he had lost. The bedroom door opened, and my husband stepped inside with a coffee mug in his hand, and that familiar smile on his face. The same smile that had fooled me for months, while he carried on his affair, right under my nose. "Good morning, beautiful," he said softly, settling on the edge of the bed beside me. "Sleep well?" I looked up at him with new eyes, seeing the subtle signs I had missed before. The way his gaze didn't quite meet mine. The slight tension in his shoulders. The phone in his back pocket that had probably been buzzing with messages from Vanessa all morning. "Actually," I said, my voice steady and calm, "I had the most interesting dream." Marcus set the coffee mug on my nightstand and leaned down to kiss my forehead, just as he had in my previous life. But now I could feel the mechanical nature of the gesture, the way his lips barely grazed my skin before pulling away. How had I ever mistaken this hollow routine for genuine affection? "What kind of dream?" he asked, settling back against the headboard with his own coffee. His tone was casual, but I caught the slight wariness in his eyes. Marcus had always been good at reading people. It's what made him an excellent Coast Guard officer. But he had no idea he was dealing with someone who held all the cards now. I stretched languidly, buying myself time to craft my response. "Oh, just one of those pregnancy dreams. Very vivid. We were out on the water, and there was a storm." I let my voice trail off, watching his face carefully. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Sounds intense. Good thing it was just a dream, right?" I took a sip of the coffee he'd brought me, perfectly prepared with 2 sugars and a splash of vanilla creamer, exactly how I liked it. It was these small gestures that had made me fall so hard for Marcus Donovan 7 years ago. Back when those gestures were genuine. We had met at a charity fundraiser for the local children's hospital, where I was working as a pediatric nurse. Marcus had been there in his dress uniform, representing the Coast Guard, and I remember thinking he looked like something out of a recruiting poster. Tall, broad-shouldered, with those piercing blue eyes and that confident smile that suggested he could handle any crisis. He had approached me during the silent auction, commenting on a painting I was admiring. "Beautiful piece," he had said, but his eyes were on me, not the artwork. Though not nearly as beautiful as the woman looking at it. It should have been a cheesy pickup line, but somehow Marcus had delivered it with such genuine warmth that I found myself blushing like a teenager. We spent the rest of the evening talking, and I discovered that beneath that polished exterior was a man who genuinely cared about helping people. He told me stories about dramatic rescues, about pulling families from sinking boats and finding lost hikers in treacherous waters. His passion for his work was infectious, and I fell for the hero narrative he painted. Our courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic gestures. Marcus would show up at the hospital after my shifts with surprise dinners and flowers. He took me sailing on his personal boat, a sleek 30-foot cabin cruiser he had named Second Chance, after a particularly difficult rescue that had shaped his career. Under the stars, he would tell me about his dreams of starting a family, of finding someone who understood the demands of his job but would be his anchor when he came home. "You're it for me, Catherine," he had said on the night he proposed, down on one knee on the deck of that same boat. "You're my safe harbor." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. "I'm thinking of something fancy," she said. "Maybe that new Italian place downtown? I want to dress up and drink good wine and celebrate properly." The mention of wine made my stomach clench. I'd been making excuses for months about why I wasn't drinking: headaches, medication, a temporary health kick. But as the pregnancy progressed and my lies became more elaborate, I worried that people were starting to notice the pattern. "Actually, I might be coming down with something," I told Rachel, hating myself for the deception. "Maybe we could do something more low-key?" "Sarah, you've been coming down with something for months now," Rachel said, her voice shifting from excitement to concern. "Are you okay? Really okay? You've seemed off lately, and Marcus mentioned you've been tired and moody." The fact that Marcus had been discussing my behavior with my sister sent a chill through me. How many other people had he mentioned my changes to? How long before someone connected the dots I'd been so desperately trying to keep separate? "I'm fine," I insisted, but even I could hear how unconvincing I sounded. "Just work stress. You know how it is." But Rachel knew me too well to accept such a simple explanation. "Why don't you come over tomorrow? We can order pizza and have a sister night. No pressure, no fancy restaurants. Just us." I agreed because refusing would have raised more questions. But I spent the entire drive to Rachel's apartment the next evening, practicing casual conversation topics that would steer us away from any discussion of my health or behavior. I wore my most concealing outfit, a loose sweater over a flowing dress, and prepared myself for an evening of performance. Rachel's apartment felt like a minefield of potential exposure. Every mirror might reveal my profile at the wrong angle, every chair might be positioned to highlight my changing shape. I found myself constantly adjusting my clothing, crossing my arms strategically, maintaining conversations that kept the focus on her engagement rather than my life. "So tell me about the proposal," I said, settling carefully into the corner of her couch with a pillow positioned across my midsection. "I want to hear every detail." Rachel launched into the story with enthusiasm, describing how David had proposed during a weekend trip to the coast, how he'd hidden the ring in a tide pool for her to find. Her happiness was infectious, and for a moment, I forgot about my own complicated situation and just enjoyed being present for my sister's joy. But then she shifted the conversation in a direction I hadn't anticipated. "I keep thinking about how different our lives are going to be," she said, curling up in the chair across from me. "Like, in 5 years, I'll probably have kids, and you and Marcus will have kids, and we'll be these totally different people than we are now." The casual mention of future children made my chest tighten. Our baby would be born in less than 4 months, but I couldn't share that reality with anyone. I was living in a strange parallel universe where my sister was planning for a future that was already my present. "Yeah, kids change everything," I said carefully, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Are you and Marcus still planning to wait a few more years?" Rachel asked, taking a sip of the wine I'd declined. "I remember you guys had that whole timeline mapped out." The timeline, the careful plan that had once felt so secure and sensible, now seemed like a joke. I'd been so focused on controlling the timing of our family that I'd lost sight of the fact that some things are fundamentally beyond our control. Plans change, I said, then immediately regretted how cryptic that sounded. But temporarily stretched into weeks, then months. Vanessa's needs seemed to grow more elaborate and time-consuming. Suddenly, she was interested in learning to sail, and who better to teach her than Marcus? She wanted to explore the local hiking trails, and Marcus knew all the best ones. She was feeling isolated and lonely, and Marcus felt obligated to include her in our social plans. I tried to be understanding. After all, I had seen how Marcus's protective instincts extended to everyone around him. It was one of the things I loved about him. But something felt off about Vanessa's helplessness. She was supposedly a successful executive who had navigated corporate boardrooms and high-stakes marketing campaigns, yet she couldn't seem to figure out basic tasks without Marcus's guidance. The changes in my husband were subtle at first. He started spending more time at the station, citing increased training requirements. His phone, which used to sit openly on the kitchen counter, now seemed permanently attached to his hip. He would step outside to take certain calls, claiming they were work-related, but I noticed he never seemed to have these private work calls before Vanessa's return. Most concerning was the shift in his attention toward me and the pregnancy. The man who had once talked to my belly every night now seemed distracted during our conversations about baby preparations. When I showed him ultrasound pictures or shared exciting developmental milestones, his responses felt automatic, like he was going through the motions rather than genuinely engaging. "Everything okay?" I had asked him just 2 weeks ago, after he had spent an entire dinner scrolling through his phone instead of discussing potential names for our daughter. "Of course," he had replied, not even looking up, just busy with work stuff. But I had caught glimpses of his screen before he tilted it away. The messages weren't from his Coast Guard colleagues. They were from Vanessa, and they weren't about work. Now, sitting in our bed with the knowledge of how this story was supposed to end, I could see the full picture with devastating clarity. Marcus hadn't gradually fallen out of love with me. He had fallen in love with someone else, someone who needed him in ways I never had, who made him feel like the hero he had always seen himself as. "So," Marcus said, pulling me back to the present moment, "I was thinking we could take the boat out today. The weather is supposed to be perfect, and we haven't been out in weeks." Here it was, the invitation that would set everything in motion. "That sounds wonderful," I replied, my voice steady despite the storm building inside my chest. "Just the two of us?" Marcus hesitated for just a fraction of a second, the same hesitation I had missed completely the first time around. "Well, actually, I thought maybe we could invite Vanessa. She's been having a really hard time lately, and I think being out on the water might help her feel better." I smiled, the same trusting smile I had given him before. But this time, I knew exactly what game we were playing. "Of course," I said sweetly. "Poor Vanessa. She's lucky to have such a caring friend." 2 years later, I stood on the wraparound porch of my cottage in Seaside Harbor, Maine, watching my daughter Emma take her first wobbly steps across the weathered wooden planks. At 18 months old, she had Marcus's determined spirit but my stubborn streak, a combination that kept me constantly on my toes but filled my heart with fierce pride. "Mama, look!" she squealed, clapping her tiny hands as she managed 3 steps before plopping down on her diaper-cushioned bottom. Her laugh was pure sunshine, untainted by the darkness that had brought her into this world. "I saw, baby girl," I said, scooping her up and spinning her around. "You're getting so big and strong." The cottage was small but perfect. 2 bedrooms, a cozy living room with a stone fireplace, and a kitchen that overlooked the harbor, where fishing boats bobbed peacefully in the morning light. It was nothing like the grand colonial Marcus and I had shared in Millbrook, but it was mine. Every piece of furniture, every painted wall, every carefully tended flower in the garden represented a choice I had made freely, without considering anyone else's needs or desires. The settlement from Marcus's life insurance policy and the wrongful death lawsuit against the Coast Guard had provided enough for me to buy the cottage outright and set up a trust fund for Emma's education. I had also used part of the money to open a small pediatric clinic in town, serving the fishing families and year-round residents who couldn't always make the hour-long drive to the nearest hospital. Dr. Catherine Fletcher. I had legally changed back to my maiden name after Marcus's death. The name Donovan felt like wearing clothes that belonged to someone else, a costume from a play I no longer wanted to perform in. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Kim, my closest friend and the clinic's nurse practitioner. Running late for girls' night. Emergency with the Peterson twins' ear infections. Start without me. I smiled, settling Emma in her high chair with some cut-up fruit while I finished preparing dinner for my small circle of friends. Moving to Seaside Harbor had taught me the value of chosen family, the people who showed up not because they were obligated to, but because they genuinely cared. There was Sarah, a divorced mother of two, who had escaped her own toxic marriage and understood the complicated grief of losing someone who had hurt you. Maria Santos, the school principal who had become like a grandmother to Emma and taught me that strength could be gentle. And Beth Chen, no relation to Vanessa, thankfully, who owned the local bookstore and had helped me rediscover my love of reading during those long sleepless nights when Emma was a newborn. The doorbell rang and I heard Maria's voice calling out, "Catherine, we brought wine and gossip." I laughed, opening the door to find Maria and Beth laden with grocery bags and wearing matching grins. Maria, a silver-haired powerhouse in her 60s, immediately made a beeline for Emma, who shrieked with delight at seeing her honorary grandmother. "How's our princess today?" Maria cooed, lifting Emma from her high chair. "Did you practice your walking like we discussed?" Beth set down a bottle of local wine and a container of homemade cookies. "Please tell me you have updates on the mystery man who's been asking about you at the hardware store." I felt my cheeks warm as I busied myself setting out plates. For the past month, David Morrison, a marine biologist who had recently moved to town to study the coastal ecosystem, had been finding increasingly creative reasons to chat with me wherever our paths crossed. He was kind, intelligent, and had the most genuine laugh I'd heard in years. More importantly, he seemed to understand that Emma and I were a package deal, and he never pushed for more attention than I was ready to give. "There are no updates because there's nothing to update," I said, though my smile betrayed me. "Liar," Beth said cheerfully. "He specifically asked Mrs. Henderson at the post office if you were seeing anyone. That's practically a marriage proposal in small-town terms." Sarah burst through the door just then, looking frazzled but triumphant. "Crisis averted, twins are on antibiotics, and I brought ice cream to make up for being late. What did I miss?" "Catherine is pretending she's not completely smitten with the cute scientist," Maria said, bouncing Emma on her hip. "David Morrison?" Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, he's lovely, and Emma adores him. She actually giggled when he waved at her at the farmer's market last week." I looked at my daughter, who was contentedly playing with Maria's earrings, completely unaware that these women were plotting my romantic future. The truth was, I did like David. More than I was ready to admit, even to myself. But the idea of trusting another man, of making myself vulnerable again, still felt like standing on the edge of a cliff. "I'm just not sure I'm ready," I admitted, settling into my favorite armchair. "Emma and I have a good life. We're happy, we're safe, we're independent. Why complicate that?" Beth poured wine for everyone except me. I was still nursing Emma, though she was mostly on solid foods now. "Because happiness isn't a finite resource, honey. Having more doesn't diminish what you already have." Plus, Sarah added pragmatically, Emma could use a positive male role model in her life. Not because she needs a father figure, but because it's good for children to see healthy relationships. The conversation drifted to other topics: the upcoming town festival, Maria's ongoing battle with the school board over funding, Beth's plans to expand the bookstore. But their words stayed with me as we cleaned up later and put Emma to bed. Beth said, After my friends left, I stood in Emma's nursery watching her sleep. She had Marcus's dark hair but my green eyes, and sometimes when she smiled in her sleep, I could see glimpses of the man he might have been if he had chosen differently. I had worried, during my pregnancy, about how I would explain her father to her when she was old enough to ask questions. But now I knew. I would tell her that her daddy was a hero who saved people for a living, which was true. I would tell her that he loved her very much, which I chose to believe. And when she was older, I would tell her that sometimes good people make bad choices, and that love isn't always enough to fix everything. What I wouldn't tell her was the full story of how she came to be. The betrayal, the drowning, the supernatural second chance I'd been given. Some truths were too heavy for small shoulders to carry. I walked out to the porch, wrapping a shawl around my shoulders as I settled into the rocking chair Marcus had never gotten to assemble. The harbor was quiet except for the gentle lapping of waves against the dock and the distant cry of seagulls. A year ago, I had received a letter from Detective Warren with an update on the case. Vanessa's insurance fraud had finally gone to trial, and she had been sentenced to 5 years in federal prison. The investigation had uncovered a pattern of manipulative behavior going back years. She had targeted at least 3 other married men using fake pregnancies, manufactured crisis, and elaborate schemes to extract money and attention. Marcus hadn't been her first victim, though he had certainly been her most devastating success. Oh, I felt nothing when I read that news. No satisfaction, no vindication, no closure. Vanessa Chen had become irrelevant to my story the moment I chose to walk away from Marcus that morning. She was a symptom of our marriage's problems, not the cause. The cause was a man who was so desperate to be needed that he chose fantasy over reality, drama over stability, and ultimately, his lover over his family. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. For just a moment, my heart skipped. Old habits from the days when unexpected messages often meant Marcus was in danger. But the message made me smile instead of worrying. "Hi, Catherine. This is David Morrison. I hope it's okay that I got your number from Sarah. I'm organizing a beach cleanup this weekend, and wondered if you and Emma might like to join? No pressure. Just thought it might be fun. David." I stared at the message for a long moment, my thumb hovering over the keyboard. Sarah must have given him my number, which meant she really was plotting my romantic future. But the invitation was perfectly pitched, casual, including Emma, focused on community service rather than romance. Before I could overthink it, I typed back, "Emma and I would love to help. What should we bring?" His response came quickly. "Just yourselves. I'll handle the supplies. Looking forward to it." I set the phone aside and looked out at the harbor, where the lighthouse beam swept across the water in its eternal rotation. 2 years ago, I had drowned in Lake Morrison, and Marcus Donovan had chosen to save another woman instead of his pregnant wife. That version of my story had ended in tragedy and betrayal. But this version, the one where I lived, where I chose myself, where I built a new life on my own terms, this version was still being written. And for the first time since I'd been given this impossible second chance, I was genuinely excited to see what the next chapter might hold. Emma stirred in her crib, making the soft cooing sounds that meant she was dreaming. I whispered a prayer of gratitude to whatever force had sent me back that morning, giving me the knowledge and strength to save us both. Tomorrow I would take my daughter to the beach, where a kind man with gentle eyes would show her how to pick up trash and protect the ocean she loved to watch from our porch. Emma would probably charm him completely, the way she charmed everyone who met her. And maybe, just maybe, I would let myself imagine a future where trust wasn't a luxury I couldn't afford. But tonight, I was content to sit in the quiet darkness, surrounded by the life I had built from ashes, grateful for every breath that Marcus's choices had almost stolen from us. The lighthouse beam swept across the porch one more time, and I finally went inside to sleep, leaving the past where it belonged, in the deep, dark waters I had escaped from and would never return to again. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.